Welcome to the Yogic Studies podcast. I'm your host, Seth Powell. This podcast features in-depth explorations into the traditions of yoga, Sanskrit, Indian philosophy, and South Asian religions. Through candid conversations with scholars and practitioners, we will immerse in the latest and most cutting-edge research on all things yoga. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Yogic Studies podcast. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Daniela Bevilacqua of the Haṭha Yoga Project at SOAS, the University of London, for a fascinating conversation on Hindu asceticism and Haṭha Yoga. Daniela Bevilacqua is a South-Asianist who received her PhD in Civilizations of Africa and Asia from Sapienza University of Rome and in Anthropology from the University of Paris, Nanterre. Her PhD research was published by Routledge under the title Modern Hindu Traditionalism in Contemporary India, the Sri Maṭh and the Jagadguru, Rāmānandācārya in the Evolution of the Rāmānandī Sampradāya. She is now a postdoc research fellow at SOAS, working for the ERC-funded Haṭha Yoga Project, which began in 2015 and which, as we'll discuss today, sadly is in its final year. Through Daniela's groundbreaking fieldwork in India, she looks at the present practices of Haṭha Yoga among sādhus belonging to traditional sampradayas and which are connected with the physical practice of yoga and austerities. The purpose of this research is to confront ethnographic material with textual and historical evidences to reconstruct the development of these practices. Daniela has also recently taught an online course for us here at Yogic Studies entitled YS 103, Yoga and Hindu Asceticism from Past to Present. So if you enjoy this episode and are curious to learn more about Daniela's research, in addition to the links that we'll put in the show notes, we recommend you take her online course, which is now available for self-study. Listeners can receive 20% off by using the promo code Daniela20. That's all caps, DANIELA, the number 20. All right, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Daniela Bevilacqua. All right. Well, welcome, Daniela. It's so great to have you here. Thank you for making the time.
Thanks to you, Seth, for asking me for doing this podcast. I'm so excited. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really my pleasure. You're definitely one of the people at the top of my list for this podcast. So I'm excited to have you here. And I'm especially excited for the timing of our conversation because, as our listeners know, you've been a part of this 5-year European Research Council funded Haṭha Yoga Project, and you're now coming to the end of those 5 years. So it's
thanks so much, Seth, to remind me about this. Thank you so much.
But it's exciting because we get to now pick your brain a bit and find out what have you learned at the end of all of this and to think through this project a little bit at the tail end. So I want to get to all of that. I want to talk about the Haṭha Yoga Project and your field work and research. But before we get into all of that, I'd like to kind of back up a little bit and just talk with you a bit and learn from you how we got here and to learn a little bit about Daniela's story. And so I wonder if you could share with us a little bit, a short version of how you came to the study of India, anthropology, and this particular subject of Hindu asceticism and yoga.
Okay. Well, I will make this long story of my life very short. First of all, I was just curious because I finished my high school and I was studying sciences. And I realized I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that kind of scientist. And I was very much into philosophy. And I really want to challenge myself because in the high school, I was very bad in languages. So I tried to put these two things together, like how to improve my languages skill and my crave for philosophy. And so I found this pamphlet on Oriental languages in Rome, Sapienza, the University of Rome, Sapienza. And I was like, wow, my God, this is so exciting. Like, a different culture. I had no idea about India, really, like just, random things. And so I was like, let's start this kind of course in the university. And so I started I was 19 years old. I started different subjects about India, and I went in India the first time. Then I decided to focus on arts and miniatures in Rajasthan.
Like a study abroad program in university?
I did that for my MA. I went to Calcutta for studying this, and then it's like my first breakup with India. So I escaped from Calcutta. I was like so angry with India, and I wanted to quit everything, like far away from India. So that is when I decided to.
Because of the intensity of the city and urban life there?
Yeah, it was the monsoon time and it was raining a lot, and the house wasn't so good. The city was flooding, and I felt like, oh my God, this is too much. Do I want to do this for my entire life? And in that time I said no. And so I went back home. Like after 10 days I just escaped from India. But then I was trying to digest that situation, and I decided, since I love to challenge myself, to go back, but with the toughest essay ever for me, that is Hindu fundamentalism. So I really wanted to dig into like real people, not just art and book and what you can find in books, but really to see the worst of India, that for me is really Hindu fundamentalist. And in this way I got to study even more religious I was more into the religious studies, and from that on I decided to look at contemporary history. And then from there I decided to look at more ethnographic studies as well. And that is how I got into my PhD research. I don't know if you want to know more about the different studies.
Your initial experiences in India were not so positive then, and were quite challenging and intense, and it sounds like could have scared you off completely, but something about the intensity of that also sort of pulled you in and you decided to give it another chance.
That was not my first time in India. That was the third time in India for me. So that was also quite shocking. Like, I was like, come on, you've come to India before. Why are you so mad now? Why do you want to leave? And I think it was actually, I don't know, it was actually good because it completely changed the courses of my studies. And so, I don't know where I would have been now if I would have, followed this art historian course and blah, blah. No idea, but I'm very happy about that because I could improve my Hindi and I really could go very much in touch with the grassroots of Indian culture. That is what I really love, I would say. Yeah.
And so then you decided to go on to a PhD in anthropology. And so what informed your decision to choose anthropology as a discipline and to study Hindi as your primary language?
Yeah, that is not completely true because I did my PhD in co-tutoring. It was in between Rome and Paris. And I was studying with an historian in Rome because for my MA, I was working on the Ram Janmabhoomi issue, that is this very difficult and heavy political and historical, how to say, horrible moment, let's say, in the history. controversial moment in the history of India that was focused on this mosque in Ayodhya that was like destroyed in 2019 thanks to the support of this Ram Bhakti, Ram devotion. So I really wanted to understand what is the source of this Ram devotion. And that is why I looked at the religious order that is the one who spread actually this Ram Bhakti in the northern of India. And this is the Rāmānandī Sampradāya. But I wanted to work like with people, as I said to you before. So I needed an anthropologist to teach me how to do that. So how to do ethnographic work, because I have to admit, I never studied anthropology in my life. So whatever I know is because my tutor, that is this fantastic scholar, Véronique Bouillet, she taught me everything I know, like very practical way. And she suggested me the books and the articles to read because I had no idea. And for her as well, it was a big challenge. Like, okay, this girl has no idea about anthropology. She has never done ethnography. So I have to help her out. And she did. And I mean, for me, she was like my guru. And in Rome, I was working with an historian. So in my PhD, I put together these two disciplines, like history and ethnography mostly, because for me, this is very much important. You have to know the history of your topic if you want to really understand the present. And this is what I'm doing till now. I mean, I think for me, this method really works like properly. And so after
So
that,
were you enrolled in two different PhD doctoral programs then? One in Rome and one in Paris simultaneously?
exactly. Yes, exactly,
Wow.
said. Yeah, that is why I got two titles. So I am a doctor in anthropology for the Paris University, and I am a doctor in language and culture of Asia and Africa, blah, 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 in Rome. So, in one shot, you got two titles. I was very lucky. But I didn't realize that. I just wanted to do my job in the best way possible and, a good result.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes a lot of sense in terms of your current work, having that training and background both in history and anthropology. And I think
Yeah. And
you probably didn't know it at the time, but you were so fortunate to have this great scholar anthropologist, Véronique Bouillet in Paris, who is, for our listeners, if you don't know, she's one of the foremost scholars of the Nath Sampradāya. And has done incredible scholarship on the Nath yoga tradition and these ascetics in India. And that must have been a wonderful experience getting to learn from her.
yeah. I mean, she's great. Until now, she's helping me out and giving me good advices. And I was also very lucky because, as I told you, I was working on the Rāmānandī Sampradāya, and James Mellinson is part of this sampradaya, of this religious order. And he's very much in touch also with Véronique Bouillet. So I contacted him while doing my PhD. And so we were in touch because I was asking him information about the order. And when he was looking for an ethnographer who could work with sadhus in India, he asked Véronique Bouillet for
Mm.
advices. And she suggested my name to him. So that is how we got in touch actually with Jim. So, I was very lucky, I have to say.
Wonderful, yeah, and that's sort of how these things happen, isn't it? And
Yes.
what an incredible postdoc position then you were able to get after finishing the PhD. When did you finish the dissertation? And maybe do you want to just tell us very very briefly maybe about that research project and the PhD? What did you focus on for the dissertation?
Yeah. I focus my attention, I said to you, on the Rāmānandī Sampradāya, and especially the present development of this order, focusing my attention on Banaras, because there is all this new office in the Sampradāya, that of the Jagadguru Rāmānandācārya, and the main place is based in Banaras, and is the Shri Maṭh in Panchaganga Ghat. And this is very new stuff, like there are different Jagadguru Rāmānandācārya spread in India, and nobody has done a work on it. So I really wanted to understand why did they invented these charges, what happened, why they are like, popping out in different places. And I wanted also to understand what is the role of the Jagadguru. So even the role of a guru in India. So this really put me in touch with, pilgrims, devotees, and all these kind of religious devotional attitudes that I had no idea about it. And so, but of course, the amount of scholarship about the Rāmānandī Sampradāya and Rāmānanda is there. So that is why I wanted to study history properly, to understand the figure of Rāmānanda and the different historical places connected with this order in the northern of India, and then to reach the present. And I have to say, at the beginning, Véronique Bouillet was very skeptical about this. She was like, oh my God, how can she put everything together? But then, focusing on the image of the guru and how this image, changed over the century, it really helped me out. And I think the PhD was quite good. It has been published by Routledge, and I'm still very satisfied about it. It's like sometimes you write the thesis and you're like, oh my God, I want to change everything. But with that, I'm still quite happy, I have to say.
Good. And we'll definitely put a link to it in the show notes for our listeners. So, Daniela, I'd like to back up again a little bit and just now think a little bigger picture, even about the subject matter of Indian asceticism and these Hindu ascetics. Now, the concept of asceticism and renunciation is something that I think is, especially in a yoga culture, is sort of talked about quite loosely in this idea of householders versus ascetics. But really, the concept of asceticism and renouncing one's life and the social order completely for religious purposes, in some ways, it's something quite foreign to our contemporary, let's say, at least Western, global culture. And yet, it's something that is still to this day quite important and valued in India. Of course, in non-Indian civilizations and cultures, there's many other examples of ascetics and certainly renunciate monastic traditions. But in India, this is really maintained to the present day and is something that one encounters in the public sphere and is quite an active and major part of Indian culture and society.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you could just share with us a little bit about this concept of asceticism. Where does this idea grow out of? Why is it so important and valued in India even today?
Well, I have to say that it has a value for sure, but there are different attitudes towards ascetics in India, because, there is also this idea that sadhus and ascetics are just thieves and they are just people who do not want to work. So it's true that they are important, but we also have to open the eyes on the different perspective through which Indians look at ascetics. And I think that really, if we have to look at asceticism like renunciation to social life, and if we have to look for some roots, I really think the base is like what unify all these kind of attitudes all over the world, like questions about life and about the meaning of life. So I'm just working on this topic for my monograph these days, and it's really that the base, like, some people probably felt a feeling of being unsatisfied with the life. Just is just this life. And so they started to questioning about the self and about more deeper questions but life. And 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 i'm i mean i'm suggesting this because this is what you find even today among sadhus, among ascetics. Those I have spoken with, they really stress this kind of wish of getting far away from materialistic things and from this kind of doing the same stuff over and over again but without any specific meaning. So what is the importance of life? So some of these people really want to go more into the meaning of life and what is the self and what is our purpose in this world. And what I think, and one of the reason I think ascetics in India are still so much present is because of their lifestyle. So, like as you said, in different cultures, you find monks and you find ascetics as well, but they really live retired in monasteries. And instead, in the Indian society, in the Indian cultures, you find the figure of the wandering ascetics. So these people roaming, going from a village to another village, and from north to south of India. So they really are visible to the people. And people know that some of them have a deeper understanding of the world, of human beings, human souls, let's say, but sometimes even they know how to cure diseases and how to solve problems. So that is why I think they are still very much active and very much appreciated among Indians, because what I have learned and what I have seen, like, spending time with sadhus and sitting close to the dhuni, the fire, and see what kind of people are coming to meet them and what kind of questions they are asking to these ascetics. They are very common, very general questions about problems in the family, or problem with a wife, or asking for blessing because their daughters or sons are going through an exam. So they are really looking for support.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, and I think this is very, it's still very much important, the support that you can get from these religious figures. They really are considered a kind of holy father. And probably it was the same in even in Western countries, when we didn't have like psychologists, and people used to go and talk with the priests, and sharing with them, asking for advices, because this is what you find many cases, like people go to these ascetics asking for advices. And of course there are also advices concerned religious issues, and they are looking for guidance for a spiritual path. And then it's when maybe they become disciples of a specific guru. So I think it's very much complex, the relationship between householders and ascetics in India. This is just to summarize a bit.
Thank you. And I'm sure, there's this next question I'm going to ask you is somewhat broad, and I'm sure there's many complex answers to this, but what are some of the reasons, in your experience, that one decides to become an ascetic or a sadhu? Uh,
Ah,
is it, you were talking about, seeking, deeper uh, answers to some of life's challenges or problems, this basic fundamental problem of dukkha or suffering, this notion of wanting to be released from samsara. Um, but I imagine there's also sometimes more social or even just practical, pragmatic reasons, or perhaps sometimes it's not out of their own choosing. Uh, I wonder if you could just share with us a little bit, like, what are some of the motivating factors of why one chooses or not to become an ascetic, and take us through that process a little bit of how one leaves this, normative social life and everyday world, and then sort of enters into one of these sampradayas, one of these ascetic traditions?
Okay, yeah, good, yeah, lovely question. Yeah, there can be different reasons why an individual wants to enter one of these sampradaya, and of course there is the religious uh, reason, no? But like I really met many sadhus who were like, I felt the samsara, that is, let's say, the world is useless. It's just, it's an illusion. And they were feeling like wasting the time, because there is this idea that be born in a human body is a kind of golden chance. And you cannot waste this chance, because it's through this body you can reach moksha, or you can even reach, because I have to stress that not all the sadhus, not all the ascetics are looking for moksha, for
Mm.
being released from this world, because those who are more connected, like the Vaishnava especially, who are looking for bhakti, they have bhakta devotees, they want to be in this world, because in this way they will continue their devotion towards God, and then their freedom will just depend on God, on the grace of God. So of course there are all these kind of religious reasons behind the entrance in a sampradaya, but as you said, there can be many more pragmatical situations, like especially when let's say, the individual is a child. So I've heard the stories, like sadhu told me that they just wanted to escape from the family, because big family in the village, they had no food, and very hard condition. So, and they were, as I told you before, wandering sadhus, coming in groups here and there, and they were just looking at these babas doing nothing in their ideas, and they just decided to leave and to join them. And then there are also, like guys, let's say bachelor, who don't want to get into the responsibility
Mhm.
of the Indian world, because as a man you have to have a job, and you have to have a family and kids, and you have a lot of responsibilities. So some of them, they just don't want all of this, and so they decide to enter a religious order. For a woman it's much more difficult, so especially widows or women who do not have the support of men, they enter religious orders to protect themselves, because the Indian society can be very aggressive. So really, and in some cases there are kids who are dedicated to a religious order. For example, I heard the story of this yogi from the Nath Sampradaya, who was donated to a guru when he was 4 years old, because his mother was not able to get pregnant. So she went to this guru and she asked for blessing. Then she got pregnant, but of course, she had to give the baby to the guru.
Mm.
Like the first child has to be donated to the ashram, and so that is how he became a young. A young ascetic, let's say.
Wow.
But it's not so easy now, because at the beginning, like, people think like, oh, you find a guru, you get initiated. It's not like that. The training is very hard, because it's like the guru is going to kill your ego. You have to do all the most simple stuff, cleaning up, cooking, and serving other people. You have really to learn how to be humble, and the guru is going to teach you, no matter how, beating you, whatever, treating you badly. And I've been told about so many stories of harsh gurus towards their disciples. And it's the guru, after checking out his disciple long for years and years, he will, decide and push him towards one religious path rather than another. So if we think about yoga, it's not that all the disciples of, let's say, a yogi, a practitioner of yoga sadhana, are going to become yogis as well. Perhaps the guru will just say, you better to play the dholak, you better to do this kind of service instead of doing this kind of religious discipline, because it's not for everyone. And the role of the guru is actually to study the disciple and do what is the best for him or for her.
Mm.
But yeah, it must be a very good guru, and the disciple has to be a very, good disciple. So yeah, more or less is this.
So there's a lot of threads there to pick up on, and maybe we'll come back to some of those things, including the role of the guru and prescribing particular teachings is something I want to come back to.
Okay.
But some of what I'm hearing in what you were just sharing with us is that, and I think as we know, this is not necessarily an easy life. It's a life of incredible rigor and
Yeah.
discipline and cultivation of what is often termed tapas, or this
Yes.
internal heat, these austerities that are often practiced, and the lifestyle itself, of living very frugally, often outdoors, moving from one place to another, visiting pilgrimage sites, uh, living very moderately and simply with very few possessions, in the sometimes extreme conditions of Indian climate. It's not an easy life at all for ascetics themselves. And I'm curious to hear a little bit about you as the ethnographer and as the scholar, uh, kind of coming into India for quite long periods of time, I know, for your field work, and where you yourself have adopted this lifestyle to some extent to really enter into the world of the sadhus, a world, as you're saying, that's really not for everyone. There's a certain hardcore intensity to this lifestyle. And I think one thing that's quite remarkable, Daniela, about your work and your research is that you really have the aptitude for this. You're somebody who has become quite comfortable in this world. You've really taken the time to develop relationships with these people and to build that level of trust from the inside. And so I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about what it's been like for you to sort of temporarily adopt this lifestyle during your field work, and, some of your experiences, positives or negative, perhaps even uh, challenges you've experienced as a foreigner, as a female scholar, to what is often a very male-centered ascetic tradition, although I hope we can talk later about female practitioners.
Yeah, sure.
But as an outsider to this tradition coming in, and what that has been like for you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I have to clarify that, not all the ascetics are really following the disciplines, and even this idea of ascetics just, roaming around and being very tough. It is true, but it's also true that sometimes they are just lazy and they don't do anything, as well as I said before, not all of them will do these practices because perhaps they have to take care of the ashram, so they can live even very comfortable life, and they can accumulate power and money. So I mean, of course,
Mhm.
the ascetics I was working with, they are the tough guys, surely, but just to give a bigger perspective and representation of asceticism in India, because as I told you, it's very complex and it's very hierarchical. You can find very rich and powerful ascetics that probably they are not going to do the sadhana like as we intend, because their role is different, is teaching, and so they will be the teachers of the groups. So really it's a very complex world, and sometimes it's even lighter than we think, and that is why some Indians actually they believe that the householder's life is more complicated than the sadhu's life, no? Because it's like you don't have responsibilities, you have just to do your sadhana. Instead, as a householder, you have to think of your family and the job and this and that. Anyway, I go back to my role in this fantastic world. I mean,
Mm.
um, I don't know. I mean, of course, I didn't take initiation So I didn't go through all the tough disciplines and the rules that they have to follow. But of course, as an external individual entering this kind of world, I had to know some rules to respect, how to behave with sadhus. Sometimes it's even like, how to cross my legs in front of a sadhu. Like I cannot put I learned, of course, while doing the field works, I could not put my knee up, or I cannot sit in a asana that is for guru, like Gomukhasana. It's very bad to sit in front of a guru in Gomukhasana because he is supposed to sit in Gomukhasana. So you have to sit in a very simple asana in front of this kind of important individuals. And, all these kind of small things you have to learn just being there. And I tried my best just to, let's say, disappear when I was there, not to attract too much attention of other people, and being very patient with the sadhus, because of course they are very much skeptical about foreigners, and in general they are skeptical about sharing with the unknown people, because it's like, who is this person? What does she want to know? Why does she want to know that? And what is she's going to do with this? So I really had to work on timing, being there, being part of this stuff, sitting for hours, as I said before, close to Adhuni, the sacred fire, and just being silent. I spent a lot of hours just sitting silent, listening at what other people were saying, and you know going and roaming here and there. Of course, I moved from one city to another with the train, but for example, during the Kumbh Mela, I was usually using a bicycle. So all the efforts I did, they were very much appreciated. And as a woman, I had to follow even more rules, because you have to wear in a certain way, you have to wear clothes in a certain way, you have to tie your hair in a certain way, because you cannot disturb the sadhus because they are celibate. So it's like you have to destroy somehow your femininity, so that they look at you simply as a human being who wants to know what they do. So I really had to, learn how to behave, learn how to talk to them, and respect their silence, respect their talking. And it's really that. And of course, when they were doing Dhuni Tap, for example, this tapasya with the fires, I was sitting there for hours, in the smoke, and they were very much impressed. Yeah, because it's a bit tough. And I mean, I adapt to situation, and I don't know. I mean, for me, everything is an adventure, and it's interesting. So I don't see the challenge in that. I see the beauty of these, and the fact that I'm learning more and more and more just simply watching at these people. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, should I say something else? I'm a bit lost now.
No, that's great. That's great. I think it gives us some great insight into this world and how you've been approaching it. And I think, as I said, I think one of the reasons you've been so successful in this is because you've put in the time, but also you approach this with a level of humility and transparency. And so you've really built that trust. And even, in your own way, the sort of tapasya of the ethnographer to stick it out through the smoke of the Dhuni tap. You,
Yes.
you have to earn your way in, right? You can't just show
Yeah,
up and
yeah.
expect, everybody's going to just talk to you because you have a PhD and you have these questions. And no, you got to hang out. You've got to, put your time in, and maybe slowly. And I think that's
Yeah.
important for people to keep in mind. You can't just you read about this online and then you fly to India and drop in at the Kumbh Mela and think you're going to get all the secret answers, to
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like sadhus are very. I mean, if you have questions, they will be very happy to answer. But it's like, let's say, the quality of the answer. To get a good quality, you will need time, because, as I said before, who are you? Why should they give it to you like a piece of their knowledge that they have, like, worked a lot to get? And so you really have to prove that you deserve this kind of knowledge, and even you deserve that they answer your question. Because sometimes, I mean, I have been also treated badly, like, I asked the wrong question to the wrong person, let's say the tough guy, and he just told me, like, finish your sweet, the prasad that he gave it to me, and said, finish your sweet and move,
Mm.
disappear, don't come back here. And just because I asked the question in a wrong way, and so, and everything is poof, lost. So that is why
You
it's better
said,
to wait.
mhm. You said something really interesting a few minutes ago about, receiving initiations or not from some of these teachers. And I've heard you say this elsewhere. I think it was in the online yogic studies course you did, Yoga and Hindu Asceticism, which was such a fantastic course, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but you made this very interesting point, which I think is also a methodological point for you as a researcher, but also just as a human being, I think. But this decision to receive initiations or not from some of these teachers in these particular traditions that you've worked with.
Mhm.
And, it sounds like occasionally you have been offered this, but for particular reasons, you've decided not to become initiated into a particular tradition. I wonder if you could just share with us a little bit about that process and why that matters, and how that informs your work and your relationship uh, with these people.
Yeah, sure. Um, I've been asked, like, do you want to get initiated? Because nowadays many foreigners go to India, and it's like a kind of hobby, it seems sometimes. Now, oh, I got initiated by this sadhu. But
A line on the CV, perhaps.
I don't know. Yeah, something like that. But then it's like, you get initiated, but you really don't understand what is supposed to happen when you are initiated. And for me, it was really an ethical point of view, an ethical reason, because, when you get initiated, you enter into this order, and you can get some information that a person who is not initiated is not supposed to have. And so for me, it was like, do I want to have information that I'm not supposed to share? So
Mm,
I said, no, of course, I don't want. I don't want to betray a guru just because I have to publish a book. So for me, that was like, no, this is impossible. I don't work like that. But also, it's a pragmatical point of view, because if you get initiated, you have to be with your guru. Of course, if you are a good disciple, I mean, if you are just pretending to be a disciple, and then, you spend some time, you get one initiation, and then you get another initiation, then it's something else. But if you, uh, want to have a time and spend time with the guru, then you have to be with him. You have to do his seva, his service. And you don't know if he's going to give you those kind of information that you were looking for, and you will be stuck with your guru, because, I mean, he's your guru. You have to be with him, especially at the very beginning, And instead, not having a guru simply allowed me to go from here to there, from this order to this other group, and to be really free to ask different persons. And since I wasn't initiated in any order, nobody could complain, because, I was just a free person going here and there, and I didn't hide, that I wasn't, I mean, just in one group. I was like, during the Kumbh Mela, I was spending time with the Rāmānandī, with the Vaishnava, and then say, okay, I'm going to the Nagas, bye-bye. And
mm,
so they were like, sometimes making fun, and especially between Sannyasin and Vaishnava, no? The Sannyasin thinks that they are the best, and they are the real sadhus. I mean, there are all these kind of gossip, and I could
mm,
just, listen of these stories. But for me, it was very much important to be honest, first of all, with myself, because I don't have faith. And I'd never met a guru who I was feeling like, oh my God, this is my guru, you know? So pretending to have faith towards a specific God or a specific a religious attitude, for me was just not right. And so I said, like, no, it's not for me. And then the freedom of getting information from here and there, here and there.
Yeah, I think it's very important to articulate that clearly, which is why I appreciate how you've said that. Just to articulate the positionality of the ethnographer, but also in this way, I like how you've said, you know, anything that your informants, that these sadhus are sharing with you then is public knowledge. And so you can feel justified in sharing that with others and writing about it in your work. Whereas if you were receiving diksha and initiations and receiving this more gupta or secret knowledge that
Yeah.
was only supposed to be to you, it creates more ethical challenges and barriers in disseminating or sharing or analyzing, that. So I think it's a very important and I would say healthy distinction that you make there. So yeah, thanks for sharing a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah, welcome. Because I mean, already I had to hide many things to the sadhus, like, private life. You cannot talk about your private life with ascetics, and at least I was honest, completely honest about my role. Like, I always said, I am a researcher. I'm studying. This is part of a project, and I'm going to write about it. So they answered with the awareness of this. And it's the same about the photograph and the videos I took. First of all, I always ask for permission. You have always to ask permission. I mean, I've seen foreigners going to the Kumbh Mela and taking photographs of ascetics without asking for permission. That is horrible, according to me, because you're like stealing a person face or a person while doing his practices without asking. It's horrible. So I always ask, can I take pictures? Can I make a video? Or can I record? And if they said no, then it's no. So I never pretend like hiding the recorder or taking a photograph when they were not looking. No, that is not how I work. It has to be like clear. If you want, good. If you don't want, I respect your decision. That's
So
yeah.
let's talk now more about the Haṭha Yoga Project, this incredible 5-year research project that's headquartered at SOAS at the University of London, that has this incredible team of yoga scholars, including yourself, Dr. James Mallinson, Jason Birch, Mark Singleton. From my perspective, this project is perhaps the greatest undertaking in the history of yoga research. The focus and dedication and the unearthing of texts, of manuscripts, of art historical materials, of ethnographic fieldwork, all coming together. I think it goes without saying that our knowledge of the history of yoga, of physical yoga, of Hatha yoga has changed tremendously over the last 5 years, through these efforts. So you shared with us earlier a little bit of how you came into the project
Yeah.
through meeting Jim, through your PhD advisor, Véronique Boyer. And tell us a little bit about kind of your role in this project, how sort of this has gone for you over the last 5 years. Just share with us, what have you been up to? What has been the nature of your work for the Hatha Yoga Project?
Okay. Well, I was, for me was a dream because as you asked me before, but I didn't reply because I forgot your question. I finished my PhD. I gave the viva for my PhD, and I already knew that I was part of this postdoc. And so, it's the best way to face, the viva. Like I'm sure about my future. And for me, as a simple PhD student, it was, oh my God, like I was looking at the team, and as you said, there was James and Jason and Mark, and these guys are really wrote articles and books that made the history of of yoga and Hatha Yoga. So for me, it was like a honor, a big, huge honor to be part of this team. And they were on this topic since, years and decades. So at the very beginning, I felt like, oh my God, I have to study a lot because, I'm just a PhD student. I was focusing on asceticism, of course, but yoga wasn't my cup of tea. And I did yoga in India, like I did asanas in India, and I learned about yoga, because I was doing Oriental languages studies. So, but it was a very superficial knowledge. So I had to study a lot again, like I did for anthropology, I did with yoga. So a new challenge, the yoga world. And I was very shocked at the very beginning because my role is mainly doing ethnographic research. And when I started this research, I was looking for what was written, about the yoga and Hatha Yoga practiced by sadhus. And I was surprised that very few articles were on this topic, like James Mallinson articles, but even the articles written by Ramdas Lam, there is another scholar who was involved with the Rāmānandī Sampradāya. And then, of course, you find references to yoga practices in different monographs, but nobody really focused their attention on this specific issue. So I said, like, okay, we have very few material here, like very few data to compare also, because when you do ethnographic work, you have to compare with the previous data, but they weren't there. So and that is why I decided, like, here we need intense field work. And this is also the way I got Jim's attention, because at the beginning he was supposed to have a kind of interviews with several people, but he sent to me his project and the ethnographic side was very lacking. So I was like, Jim, this is not good. You have to rewrite this section. And if I were your ethnographer, I would have done this, and that. And so I think he was quite impressed for my dedication. And especially because I said to him, like, I will be always in India. I have to do field works. And so he was like, okay, you are, part of this team. And yeah, and
if I could just interrupt just for a second,
yeah,
I think you raise a really important and interesting point, just regarding just what previous studies and work has been done on this subject. And as you point out in your article, Let the Sadhus Talk, and as you just said, it's quite surprising that there was such a lack of scholarship on yoga within ascetic traditions. It's quite surprising considering that yoga probably originated and developed in an ascetic context. Do you have any sense of, why hadn't this been the focus of ethnographic fieldwork prior? Why is there such a lacuna or gap here?
From one side, it is true that in general, the yogic studies are developing since the last decades. It's not like, 1 century of yogic studies and modern yoga and all of this, perhaps. And then I think also, that you need time, and it can be a bit tough to be with sadhus. And I think it's the kind of ethnography that it involves that can be a bit not for everyone. And then maybe just by chance, like, there are plenty of ethnography on sadhus, and simply the attention was on other topics. And even in the anthropology, sometimes there are some main issues that are developed. And so people were more, focusing their attention on these other topics, like caste systems, the confrontation between householders, or asceticism. There is a plenty of issues, and perhaps some of other scholars, they were so much into that, and they got initiated. So they had this knowledge, but they want to share. I mean, there can be different reason why we don't have that kind of ethnography, but I feel very lucky because so I can give a contribution to this kind of new field, and that is quite empty. So I will be very happy if other people will start doing this research, because I worked only with the 4 religious orders, but in India there are plenty, plenty of.
Tell us a little bit
Sorry.
about that. What were the main sampradayas or ascetic groups that you worked with for this project?
Yeah, okay. First of all, of course, I work with the Nath Sampradāya because they are the yogi, and they are strictly connected with the Hatha Yoga practices. The story that Gorakhnath, the founder of the Nath Sampradāya, wrote and systematized the Hatha Yoga and the practices is there. So, of course, you have to work with the Nath yogis. Then I worked with those groups who are celibate, and because celibacy is one of the core discipline that you have to follow in the yoga sadhana. So this is a kind of common thread that I follow. And the practices of tapasyas and physical yoga, like asanas and kriyas. And so this you can find in the yogi, and then you can find in the Naga section of the Daishnami Sampradaya, that is a Shaiva group connected to the figure of Shankara, this Advaita Vedanta philosopher from the 8th century. But this is again a very complex story and history of the order, and there are different typologies of ascetics in each of this group. So I focus on the Naga section because they are those more into physical practices, even weapon training and austerities. And then I worked with the Rāmānandī Sampradāya, that is this Vaishnava group, but still, I focused on a specific group that is that of the Tyagi, those that are detached, that renounce, virakt, because they are those doing tapasyas and austerities. So, as I said, you really have to know the ascetic world a bit to be picky, because otherwise you get lost. And then I worked a bit, not too much, with the Udasinakara, because this is a small order, but it has a lot of connection with the Nath and even with the Vaishnava. So it's very with the Sikh tradition. And according to the other sadhus, they are the tough guys, those doing the austerities in how they are supposed to be done, but they are quite closed. So I could not work with many of them, just a couple of them. And these are the orders I worked with. But as I said, there are plenty. And there are, Orthodox groups, heterodox group. And so the field is huge.
And over the last 5 years, you've traveled all over the subcontinent, doing field work, engaging with these various yogis among these ascetics. Tell us a little bit about some of these journeys, your field work for the Haṭha Yoga Project.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it would be nice to travel the entire subcontinent, but 4 years, because this is the 5th year and it's going to end. And this year I just went to Pakistan, but for 10 days. So for me, it doesn't count. If it's not a minimum 3 months, 6 months, it's not a real field work. And I traveled mostly the north of India and Nepal. And yes, with some jump into south of India, but more for, let's say, archaeological reason, like, as you said before, looking for temples and sculptures, especially with Jim. We traveled a lot with his bolero, his jeep, and that was a lot of fun, a lot of stories with Jim and I driving in India with the bolero jeep, as we call his car. And but like while doing ethnographic work, initially I spent a lot of time in Banaras. Like the first 6 months of the field work, they were there, because in Banaras you find representatives, all these different groups I just mentioned. And from there, I come to know people, then I moved to the Mela, like Kumbh Mela in Allahabad, in Ujjain, in Gangasagar, in Kamakya. Like Kamakya is not a Kumbh Mela, but it's again a religious festival. Because when you are in this big religious festival, of course you come to know the world. And when you are there, people can suggest you who to go to meet, and who is like a real yogi, who is the cheater, who is selling asanas and these and that. So you come to know a lot about people and the stories about them. And usually it is during the Kumbh Mela that I made this stronger connection, because I spent a lot of time, like a couple of months, 3 months in the Mela, because usually I arrive before the Mela starts, when nobody is there. And so you can, you have a lot of time with sadhus settling there, talking. And then those who invited me to go and visit them, I used to go and visit them in the ashram.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes was nice, sometimes was a bit tough. Like one of my favorite informant is this Jogi Baba, who lives in the jungle outside the Shantiniketan in West Bengal. And being in the jungle is fantastic, but sometimes can be a bit tough. So yeah, this is
And this Jogi Baba, you have some video footage that you've shared of him, right, doing some of the yogic kriyas, and he's quite an adept in some of these physical practices. Is that right?
Yeah. He's superb. He learned when he was a child, but to go back to how you become a sadhu. So he learned a lot of these techniques when he was a child, because he used to visit a guru and spend time with this guru. And probably he got initiated, but has as a child, not as a future disciple, sannyasin, renouncer. He got initiated later on because he was obliged to marry. He's a Brahmin, so he was obliged to marry, and he was obliged to wait for his son to be born. So only after he had a son, he could leave his family and do tapasya in the jungle. So he got properly initiated as a sannyasi, and he just left to be in the jungle and do tapasya there. So, there are a lot of stories about Jogi Baba, that he has siddhis, he has powers, that he can walk on the leaves of the trees, and he can, disappear or become very small, all these kind of siddhis that you find in books. So, yeah, and he has a knowledge of his body that is amazing. He knows the kriyas and asanas, like, is incredible.
So I want to ask you about this differentiation between ascetics more broadly and then the yogis among them. And this is something I think about in my own work of thinking about, even as scholars, how do we identify and what sort of terms do we use, especially in thinking about some of the sculptures and the visual material, something we've talked about before. So not all ascetics are yogis, as you've made the point very clearly. And you might even say not all yogis are ascetics, though, in pre-modern times, probably most would have been. But so it sounds like, among these sampradayas, and through your contacts, through your research, you've tried to find the yogis, the yogis. So what are you looking for there? Some of them, like Jogi Baba, Jogi is the vernacular, the equivalent of yoga or yogi in Hindi. But sometimes they have yoga or, Yogi Raj, in their name. So obviously that's a giveaway. But what, how do you approach this in your work? How do you think about, the yogis among the ascetics? What are the clear demarcations of someone as a yogi in this world?
Okay. So I'm thinking about this a lot these days because of the book I'm writing. And so I think if we look at the history of yoga, and if we think about the yogis, the label yogi probably had two kind of way to be used, in a very general way, to mean all those kind of ascetics who looked in a certain way. So with dreadlock and covering their body with ashes and doing austerities, this and that. And then there are the yogi, like the Nath yogis, those who are connected to specific lineages, to specific parampara, and therefore to a specific guru that can be Gorakhnath or Jandarnath and so on and so on. So I really think that this kind of distinction still is there in the sadhu world. So one can use the word yogi in a very general way, let's say, that more or less doesn't mean too much, according to me. It's just is a yogi, like, someone who just roam around with the jata and the ashes and that's it. But then there is the real meaning. So when we enter the differentiation between, let's say, the different typologies of yogi, because as you mentioned before, there is the yogi raj, there is the hatha yogi, and there is the yogi. This is what I mean, this is what I understood. So there is the hatha yogi, that is the one who does austerities, the different form of tapasya. So this is the hatha yogi. And doesn't mean that he followed the yoga sadhana, doesn't mean that he does asanas. No, the hatha yogi is the tapaswin. Then there is the yogi raj. The yogi raj is the one who has learned all the physical practices when he was a child, who has the perfect control of his body, not only like his muscles, but really the inner control. He knows what is going on in his body, like in his veins, in his organs, in his cells, whatever. So he is the yogi raj. And then there is the yogi. So I think the yogi is the highest, the real yogi is the one who is completely detached, because he has reached another level of knowledge that overcome dualities. And if you listen at what the sadhus says, like the stories that they say, the yogi is the one who has the control, let's say, of the self, of the atma, and therefore he can leave the body. So this, if you bring to the highest level of who is a yogi, because it's like, maybe it's a metaphor to say he reached God, and so he's in control of the self, and he can put his self, his atma, in a connection with the paramatma. So, and he has this different form of knowledge that is not like the knowledge of a scientist, or the simple knowledge of how the body works. Is it going deeper, like is really knowing the tattvas, the subtle elements, and something even different from that. So that is the yogi. So the real yogi among ascetics, those very much respected, are these kind of people who are supposed to have reached another level of knowledge and connection with God, something completely different.
Wow, that's so interesting, those three different levels and distinctions. I have so many thoughts and follow-up questions from that. But I think I want to come back to the first level of that, which is the Hatha Yogi. And of course, this is the Hatha Yoga Project. And so, you just said, and you've made this argument, especially in this wonderful article, Let the Sadhus Talk, Ascetic Understanding of Hatha Yoga and Yogasanas. I think you've made it very clear that for a lot of these sadhus, when you ask them, what is Hatha Yoga, you get a variety of answers, right? But it seems like for a lot of them, it's not necessarily or not only the outer practices, but in some ways it's a certain mental attitude that's associated with tapasya. Is that right? Could you
Yeah.
share a little bit about what is the understanding of Hatha Yoga and that Hatha Yogi level then, for many of these ascetics today?
Yeah, as you said, I was very much surprised, because when I asked, like, Babaji, what is then Hatha Yoga? So they were like, what is this question? Hatha Yoga is when you want to do something and you want to reach an aim, and you do whatever is necessary to get that point. And it doesn't matter if you die while doing it. So it's really a kind of vow, like, I want to do this and I will do that. So, of course, Hatha Yoga, as following this understanding, can be associated with the tapasya, with austerities that we know, like, sitting in the among the fire, standing up on one leg, or keeping the arm up. But then everything can become a form of tapasya, no? And that is why, as you will see from our discoveries, let's say, even asanas themselves, when practiced in a certain way, can become a form of tapasya. But yeah, I would say really for the 99% of sadhus, Hatha Yoga is this strict intention that allows you to accomplish. And of course, this is very much necessary when you are on a spiritual path, because if you don't have this determination, how can you reach God? So it's, a way. The form of tapasyas are also a way to develop this determination so that you will be able to reach your purpose. But as you were saying, this is not the only understanding that sadhus have about Hatha Yoga. I mean, this is the main one. But then they were also associating Hatha Yoga with the retention of the breath, with the control of the breath, no? Because for some of them was like, Hatha Yoga is when you control your breath, you retain your breath, and as I said before, when you decide to leave your body, simply stopping your breath. And or another understanding that is, called the esoteric understanding of Hatha Yoga, is that this one that you divide Ha and Ta, the sun and the moon, and it's putting together the different vayus into the Shushumna, so that Kundalini arises and goes up. But very few sadhus explain Hatha Yoga in this way, and they were mostly, those who had studied in some universities, who had done some, let's say, more modern courses. So I don't know how to judge the interpretation, although this is a definition that you find in text. And it's interesting for me that all the different definitions I found among sadhus are present in text. In text written before the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And for me, this is, this is a clue, like, for who was written the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, what was the audience of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and so on and so on. But of course, sadhus also understand Hatha Yoga as the kriyas, no? Like following, let's say, the description that you find in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. So the Shatkarmas, Noli, and some mudras like Vajroli mudra, Kechari mudra, all these kind of practices, actions for the bodies, that can be also understood as Hatha Yoga. And sometimes, like, a sadhu can say Hatha Yoga is tapasya, and then when I ask, like, what about the Shatkarmas? Yeah, this also is Hatha Yoga. So it's like, okay, well, that's why you have to spend a lot of time and collect a lot of different answers. But still, the mess is there. It's very messy.
And I think, when an understanding of Hatha Yoga becomes, as I think one of your informants said to you, you quote, they understand Hatha Yoga as a drid sankalp, or a firm intention, yes, or resolve. And in that way, it's more attitudinal. It's a mental disposition towards their practice, towards their activities. When Hatha Yoga moves into that framework, then in some ways, any practice or any physical activity, right, it can become Hatha Yoga when it's undertaken with this attitude of tapasya, or this intense resolve. Now, I wanted to ask you about something that you often talk about and have written about, that many of the sadhus today have a pretty negative attitude towards the yoga texts, the scriptures, and this is something that might be surprising, I think, to people today, especially in modern yoga, when there's often a looking to a text like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, or even the Bhagavad Gita, as a real crux of support for philosophy, or something that's really meant to inform the physical practice. And I think it might be surprising for people to learn that for a lot of these sadhus and yogis, uh, they're not really engaging with the texts. Most of them probably are not reading Sanskrit themselves. But even more than that, there's this attitude that the teaching doesn't, the real teaching doesn't come from the text, that it comes from the guru. So I wonder if you can say a little bit about that and how you've approached that in your work, because you're looking at the texts for history, but then you're comparing and contrasting that with what sadhus are saying and practicing today. Did that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, that's very, I mean, yeah, of course. It makes completely sense, Seth. And it's true. I mean, they are not, I would not say negative. It's just that they don't care about the text. I mean, there are different attitudes, I have to say, because as
Mm,
I said before, there are different typologies of sadhus. So there are those sadhus who are very much learned, and perhaps they will mention the text, and they will talk about the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, but from my experience, they are not the deep practitioners, I would say.
mm,
They are more scholars. But others instead, I mean, it's not just the point of not knowing Sanskrit. Sometimes some of the sadhus, they don't know how to read at all, because especially those who are into the yoga sadhana and became sadhus when they were a child, I mean, they didn't get any other form of education, just this oral transmission, because
mm,
the oral transmission is the core of the teachings, and especially when we enter the yoga practice, because yoga is based on experience. So how can you write, how can you explain something if not through experience? So that is the main difference. As the sadhu said, what is written is for everyone. And so, of course, it's a general knowledge that it's
mm,
good that other people have. But if you want to go to the core, if you want to know how to do the practice, you have to have someone who knows the practice properly, who knows how to explain it to you, who can show it to you, and even, tell you what are the problems, how to escape from difficulties, and actually who knows you. That is why the guru disciple, the guru shishya relationship is so much important, because the guru, a good guru, of course, we are talking about the best guru, will know exactly the body of his disciple and how to guide the disciple into this very complex practice. And as you said, like as you mentioned Patanjali, like the 8 steps are 8 steps. So the sadhus usually they don't skip the steps, so if there are yama and yama, they will start with yama and yama. It's not that they will start with asanas. So that is how you also learn to go into the practice, because to reach the step of the asanas, that is the control of the body, you have already started controlling your behaviors. So, and all this kind of knowledge you can get through, orality from a
mm.
guru. So that is why they are quite, they are a bit skeptical, because if you can read, if anybody can read, then is not the main teaching. I
Mm.
mean, the main teaching is in between the lines, but another person is going to explain it to you.
So
So
let's talk a little bit about asana for these sadhus. Of course, today, asana is like the most central feature of a yoga practice, or even synonymous with yoga in certain public discourse. Of course, we know from texts like the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali and from the broader history of yoga, asana is merely one component or technique, and with shifting meaning, over time. So today, within these sadhu communities, for those who do practice yoga, how do they view asana? Um, what type of what sort of an asana practice did you encounter? And yeah, how do they think about asana within their broader yoga context, or just their broader
Mhm.
sort of religious discipline?
Yeah, very huge questions because
Okay.
no, I will make it short and brief. Don't worry. It was a bit challenging because of this spread of yoga in the world. If you ask sadhus about asanas, they will think like, okay, another one, another yoga practitioner who wants to focus on what is the low level of the yoga sadhana.
Mm,
Because if you look at Patanjali, is the third step on 8. So it's really when you start trying and learning how to control your body. And for these guys, the body has to be controlled, but it has to be overcome also. You have to go over your body. That is not the important part of the practice. But I have to stress, they are religious individuals. So they do yoga for another reason. I don't know why people today do yoga. I don't know behind each individual what is the reason, but for these people is a religious purpose. So of course for them the physical side, like the first 5 steps that are the outside part of yoga, they are not so important. They are important, and they have to be properly accomplished so that they can reach and focus their attention on the last 3 steps. So for them, asanas are very much necessary because for 2 reasons. First of all, because to meditate, that is like meditation is the main practice for sadhus. That is the yoga sadhana. You can accomplish yoga through meditation. And so for doing meditation, you have to have an asana, a properly done asana, an asana that is perfected, that is siddha. So when you have an asana, a seated posture like siddhasana or padmasana that is perfected, that is the most important asana you need, because that is the posture through which you will accomplish your religious aim. But of course, while accomplishing this religious aim, while training yourself in meditation, your body can feel some pain. That is when you use the other asanas, and that is why you have to learn other asanas as well to make soft mulayam your body, to help your body continuing with the meditation. So if it's a kind of, I don't want to say that, but it's like doing some stretching to keep sitting down again and again. So that is why, according to me, there are these 2 understanding and these 2 purposes of asanas: the asanas that are used for the job, meditation, and the
mm,
asanas that are necessary for the body to
mm,
keep the body fit and to help you meditate it. But because of this, you don't need a lot of asanas, and you don't need to do these asanas for a long time,
mm.
just when it's necessary, and as long as it is necessary for your body, but not wasting, like sadhu stress, do not waste time doing asanas. That's not the important part.
And yet, there are some sadhus today who are doing some more complex asanas, right? That you've encountered. Can you share with us a little bit
Yeah.
about that? What you might think is behind that?
It's quite clear what is behind that. I think in one world business, and and maybe I have already said this in the course I did for your yogic studies. Like, I met this sadhu who made this clear distinction. He said, like, I learned yoga with my guru, and I learned yoga from a foreigner in Rishikesh. So yoga is all these kind of postures to do in a kind of sequence, and with some pranayam that can help sadhus making money. Because it's Kali Yuga is a different world. Even sadhus need some money, and some of them, they want to travel the world, and they realize that being sadhus and doing some asanas can help them accomplish this mission.
Mm,
So sometimes it's just that, you know having foreigners around, and becoming famous, because if you are an ascetic, it doesn't mean that you are an enlightened person and you are safe from the temptation of life. Maybe you were in a cave, or you were doing your sadhana for 30 years. You come back in the real world and you are tempted by these and that, and you lose your path again. you
Mm.
know it's complicated to be coherent and honest your entire life. Doesn't mean that those who teaches Westerners are like just businessmen, because some of them, they really do, because some of these foreigners are lost and they are doing the practices in the wrong way. And so it is good that there are also sadhus teaching to these people properly how to do the practice, or what is behind the practice. So, this just to clarify that it's not just bad, but there is also the good side of it.
Mm. Well, this is all so fascinating, and we're kind of coming to the end here a bit. And I'm sure you've had so many interesting experiences over the years. You mentioned many stories of your travels and fieldwork with Jim. I wonder if there's a particular story or moment, over the last 5 years in all of this that really stands out to you from your fieldwork and your time in India.
Well, I don't know. There are so many stories. There are funny stories, weird stories. The funniest moment that I had on the field work is connected to the photograph that you showed once. And I don't know where
Which one? Which
on
one is
Facebook.
that?
The one that you showed also on Facebook, the one where I'm driving the auto rickshaw
Oh,
and there is the
yes.
career. Yes, that was one of the funniest moment of my life, because I was with
Just
this
describe
Kareshwari.
describe the photograph. What is it?
Yeah. I am like, I went to meet this Kareshwari in a village, and then suddenly the Kareshwari is a sadhu who's always standing up. So he suddenly said, "Oh, I want to bring you to the zoo." I'm like, "What?" He's
Hmm.
like, "Yeah, let's go and visit the zoo." I'm like, "Okay." So we took a rickshaw to go to the zoo. That's already like quite funny. But the fact that he's a Kareshwari, so he cannot sit in the rickshaw. So he
Mhm.
had to stand outside of the rickshaw, and he was a teeny tiny Baba, and he was, trying to be attached to the rickshaw, and at the same time keeping his trishul on the while we were riding. And out of a suddenly the rickshaw man said, "Why don't you drive the rickshaw? This would be so much fun, a foreigner driving the rickshaw and the Baba there." And I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And so we just kept going like that, me driving the rickshaw, the Babas outside, and the rickshawala just laughing on the passenger side. So that was quite an incredible moment, like what I'm doing. Just went to the zoo with the Baba, and that's
And the
yeah.
practical real world implications of doing a tapas like that for so long, when you want to just go to the zoo, you have to figure out how do you stand up, how do you maintain your trishul in the rickshaw.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sometimes we don't, you don't think about these things unless you see them, like, oh my God, really, they have to think about this and that. And I spent some times with this Kareshwari, and it's very much complicated to prepare your own food and to do a lot of things while trying to remain standing up. You really have to manage and change your mental attitude. So that is why also tapasyas are very good training for them. So
Mm.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic image. I think we'll have to use that as the cover image for this episode. Um,
No, please.
So Daniela, we're now at the end of the 5 years, for better or worse. You're now trying to, write all of this up. You're transcribing, I think, these hours and hours of interviews that you've conducted and putting together this book project. Um, Looking back, and as you're in this writing process, what are some of the big takeaways for you that stand out? Perhaps just one or two things here as we kind of start to wrap up. But maybe, is there something that jumped out at you that's a big surprise, something that you weren't expecting, or is there something that has really changed your understanding of yoga and the world of asceticism, or has everything sort of just confirmed what you perhaps, thought you knew about these things?
Well, about asceticism, I have to say that I had confirmations, about the ascetic world in general, but about yoga and the yoga practices, yeah, I think the fact that I collected information on how sadhus understand asanas, how they practice, how they learn asanas, and how you can connect this with tapasya and the different understanding of Hatha Yoga. I think these are the core elements that can help us in reconstructing the development of Hatha Yoga. Of course, from the point of view of the ascetic world, because Hatha Yoga is also for us all this, but from the point of view of ascetics, I think these are very much important, let's say, findings that they are coming out from these fieldworks. And I'm very glad about that, because this is something very original. And everything will be written in the big, huge book I'm going to write.
And when can our listeners expect the publication of this big book?
I have no idea, Seth. I am still on chapter 1, and and I'm so slow because I'm a very curious person. I want to know everything, so I keep reading and postponing the writing, and this is not good. Maybe it's very healthy, but it's not good. But I will try to finish the book for October, and then it's up to the publishing house, because it's not up to me. Once the baby's done, it is their job. I've no, let's say 2021, if we are lucky.
Okay. Well, I know and I'm sure many of our listeners look forward to the book, and maybe we can get you back on the podcast on the other side of that. And yeah, thank you so much, Daniela, for taking this time and walking us through your fascinating research and ethnographic work for the Hatha Yoga Project. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, it's a pleasure for me, Seth. Yeah, thank you so much for making me sharing.
We'll be in touch. I'll let you know when the episode is going to drop.
Okay.
And yeah, thanks so much, Daniela.
Thank you to you. Bye-bye to everyone.